Hi, and welcome back to the 6th video in this web programming lecture series. In our previous video, we had a quick look at the basics of CSS. In this video, we want to have a more in-depth look at CSS and some of its functionality, and then also have a look at some tools to help you with CSS. Previously, the CSS properties that we looked at were more to do with font, such as color, font family, and font size. We will now direct our focus to the CSS properties of the container in which the font comes in, such as width, height, margin, padding, and border. For this exercise, I have a simple HTML document that has a link to style.css, similar to previous videos, and then I have one div that says hi there everyone. So now my style.css is currently empty, and you can see that there is no formatting on my web page. The first thing I'm going to do is add in my div tag so I can come back and add some styling, and then in my body tag I'm going to set the background color to be yellow, and we'll see why in a minute. So now we can see on my web page the background color is yellow and we haven't applied any formatting to our div tag. I also want to give my div a background color and a different one, but this time I'm going to set up an Rgb color scheme. To look at a different array of colors, we can go to Google and type in color picker, and something like this will come up. This will allow us to look at different types and different combinations of Rgb color schemes. RGB standing for red, green, and blue. If you navigate yourself to the left-hand side here, you can see two different ways of expressing the color combinations of RGB. In the bottom one, we can express the level of red, green, or blue as a level of 0 to 255. So you can see here we have 224 for red, 142 for green, and 136 for blue. The top expression is the same, but just in a hexadecimal number system. Both of these will work in CSS. So now I want to pick myself a nice light blue. Let's say that one. I'm going to copy that, and then we'll paste it up here. So I'll get rid of my RGB and put the hexadecimal value and refresh it. And we can see there we have hi there everyone has a nice light blue background color. So let's have a look at some other CSS properties. So the first one is width. So we can either specify width as a percentage of the page value, or we could do it in pixels. So let's make it 100 pixels, save and refresh, and you can see there it's narrowed it down to only 100 pixels. Similarly, I could go 50%, save and refresh, and we'll see that that makes it 50% of the page value. Same thing for height. So see here we could go height equals 100 pixels and width also is 100 pixels, save and refresh, and you'll see now we will have 100 by 100 pixel square. So next we have the HTML/CSS box model. This states that each HTML tag is a piece of content that has 3 types of boxes around the outside of it. The first one is padding, then the border, then the margin. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of our height and width, and we'll save and refresh that. And let's put in a border to make it blatantly obvious where the border is. So I'm going to specify that it's going to be a 5 pixel solid black border. So let's save that and refresh it. And you can see now that we have hi there everyone with a black border around the outside. You can go and play around with this border. For instance, we could make it dotted, save and refresh, and you can see we now have a dotted border. So the next thing I want to do is have a play around with padding. So we specify padding, and then we can either give it a pixel value or a percentage value. So for instance, let's go 10 pixels, save and refresh. And we can see now that we have quite a gap between our content and the border. We could also specify maybe 25%. Well, let's get rid of pixels, save and refresh. And you can see now we have a lot more padding in our example. You may actually just want to have it padded from one side. So we could do something like padded top, save and refresh, and you can see we only have padding at the top. Or maybe padding left, save and refresh, and you can see we have padding from the left. Also, if we just leave padding, we can give it 2 different values. So we can go 25% and 10 pixels, save and refresh. And you can see now that this 25% is giving us 25% padding on the top and bottom, and we now have 10 pixels of padding on the left hand side and the right hand side. We have a similar sort of thing for margin. So now we can go margin, and then maybe let's go 20%, save and refresh. And you can see now the distance between the body and the div now gives us around 20%. Maybe we'll reduce this a little bit and we'll go pixels. And you can see we've got roughly 20 pixels on either side. And then maybe we'll add in some padding as well. Let's go 12%, save and refresh. And now you can see that we have padding and margins on either side of our border. There's a whole bunch that you can do with CSS. I encourage you to go and look it up and check it out yourself. But for now, I'm going to show you some tools that have already done it for you. CSS can be a pain, and you can spend and waste a massive amount of time trying to make it just that little bit better. Fortunately for you, you don't have to go and spend time developing your own CSS. So there are pre-made tools such as Bootstrap and Materialized Css that can make your web page look a whole lot better with very minimal effort. So let's take a look at Bootstrap. Bootstrap is essentially a CSS file that's already been made for you. So all you need to do is go to their website, scroll down, copy and paste this link. So copy, and then we paste it in the head of our file. So this is a web page that I've already made. So you can see it on the left hand side, and we can see that Bootstrap automatically makes it look nicer just by giving it a nicer font. All we have to do to use Bootstrap is include a link tag similar to before. However, this time we have an absolutely referenced CSS document from Bootstrap's website rather than our own relatively referenced style.css document. So all I have at the moment is a table with 4 different rows in it. And what Bootstrap does is it allows you to use its inbuilt classes to style particular tags in a certain way. So if we navigate back to the Bootstrap website, we click on documentation and search for tables, you can see it gives us a few examples that we can use. So the first thing you can see is we add in the class that's table. So if I go back here and I go table class equals table, I save it, and then I go back to my web page and refresh it, you can see my table looks better instantaneously. I haven't had to fiddle around with anything. You can scroll down a little bit to see if we put in the class table dark, we can get a dark theme. And if we scroll down a little bit further, you can see that we can use table-stripe to get striped rows. And yeah, there's plenty of different things that we can do and implement to make our website look better. So if I go back to my web page and I add in more classes such as table dark, and let's go table striped, I can save and refresh it, and you can see that my website looks almost professionally done with little to no work. So if you go back to documentation and you have a look at layout, or you have a look at components, you can see there's heaps you can do with very little. Quite often all you need to do is input a class into your tag and you'll get a completely different look and feel. Materialized CSS is very similar to Bootstrap, it just has a different look. So if you Google Materialized CSS, you click Get Started, this time we're just going to include a different link tag. So if we copy this, and then we paste it into our head tag, save and refresh, you can see it gives us, again, a much better look in a very short amount of time. So if we come back to the Materialized website, we click up here and go CSS, you can see we get a whole bunch of features straight away. We're going to click on table. So you can see here, if we had a T head element in there, you can see we would get a bold first row. And as we scroll down, we can see if we simply add the class striped, we get a striped table. We might want to highlight the table here. So when we hover over each row, that becomes highlighted. So we simply add the class highlight. So let's do that. So you can see now if we come down and we go class equals highlight, we go back and refresh, you can see each row now highlights when we hover over the top of it. So this is all work that would have taken us hours to implement ourselves. So instead, let's get Materialized, let's get Bootstrap to do it for us, so we can get a nice clean looking website with very, very minimal effort. I highly encourage you use it yourself. So the last thing I want to show you is how we can use Chrome Developer Tools again to make the most out of our CSS. So we right click and go inspect. We can make it a size that suits us. So now if we click on elements, We can see our source code here, and we can also see the breakdown of the CSS on the left-hand side here. If we look over to the right, we can see that box model, so we can see what margins we have, what border we have, what padding we have, and what size our actual content is. So if you decide that you do want to play around with CSS, I highly recommend doing it this way. So what we can do, so if we look at, we're on our H1, which says Isaac's resume, what we can do is have a look at what CSS properties are already been applied, and we can look at what our web page would look like if it didn't have those. So if we uncheck this, we can see how it's affected. Maybe uncheck this and see we have a completely different website. So all of these edits that we're doing here, we're not actually editing our HTML or CSS files. We're just doing this within the browser. So as soon as we click refresh, you can see it all comes back to the way it was in its original file. So you have to remember what properties that you changed so that you can go back to your original source files and edit it on there. Not only can we delete or take away properties, but we can add them in. So if we click in here to our H1 and we type color::red, we can see what our website looks like with a red header. Similarly, we could go font size, maybe 30 pt, right? And that will show us what our website looks like with a red heading that's 30 pt. Again, if you don't want to look at it anymore, you can untick that color and it'll go back to the way it was. This is a very powerful way of editing your CSS rather than changing it manually, saving it, and then refreshing your web page. So in this video, we had a look at the box model, how we can use and apply Bootstrap and Materialized CSS, and how we can play around with CSS using Chrome developer tools.